Welcome to Learn HTML. This course is intended to help the yearning web designer and/or developer with better comprehending HTML. This course exercise will give you enough ingredients to start with HTML from where you are to where you want to be. Now, what is HTML? Well, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Unlike a scripting or programming language that uses scripts or performs functions, a markup language uses tags to identify content. So that's a quick few things to know about HTML. First, HTML is easy to learn. HTML can create websites, and HTML uses text editors for editing of your code. So here's an example of an HTML tag. I am a paragraph. Here are the opening and closing tags. Now we are back in the classroom. So what you see before you is a long line of code in HTML, and we do not need to know all that for right now. But we will highlight two very important things in this section. First, the doc type HTML, and then the rest of the code, but we're going to generalize it. So this is you. Now what we're looking at here is the doc type HTML. Now what does that mean? And then we have the rest of the code. Well, the doc type HTML informs the web browser which language that it is reading. That is very important for writing HTML code. Another thing you may have noticed are these two funny looking signs. First, this one, which is the opening tag, which is like the beginning of a sentence or paragraph. And then we see this sign, the closing tag, which is like the period at the end of a statement. So then let's look at the code. We have doc type HTML, which is telling the web browser which language it is reading. And then we have the rest of these paragraphs saying like HTML, body, HTML again. So what we're trying to figure out here is, what is this program telling the web browser? Well, first we have this new paragraph where it says HTML, which is the opening tag. And then we have the next HTML at the very, very bottom, which is the closing tag, concluding the entire line of code. So let's just test what we've learned so far. Now we're going to look at basic document structures. So here's an example of basic document structures. We have the doc type HTML, which tells the web browser which language it's reading. Then we have the opening and closing HTML tags. And then in between is where we have a lot of great content. So here's an example. We have the HTML opening tag, HTML closing tag, and in between there we have the head tag. Now, the HTML tags sandwich the head tag, and the head tag carries all the non-visual elements. So let's continue. We have the HTML opening and closing tags again, and we have the heads as we recently talked about. But now we have the opening and closing body tags. So HTML body tags contain all the visual structural elements that you'll see on the web page. Then we have the opening tags as we saw earlier, as well as this whole big sandwich. I love sandwiches. So let's see what we've learned. Now, as we mentioned earlier, for HTML code, you can use a simple text editor like Notepad to write out your lines of code. It's easy to use, and make sure that you always save your lines of code under .html. That's very important. So here's where we have our text editor. So we insert a line of code, and to the bottom right we have a web page. Now it's important to see that what happens in our text editor affects what happens in our web browser. Okay, so here we go. We insert our lines of code, our HTML opening and closing tag, but between that, sandwiched between that, we have the head tag. Now watch to see what happens in the bottom right corner. We insert title and then the title section. So we see in title section pop up at the top of our web browser because title describes the page and it's sandwiched between the HTML tag, and man, I love sandwiches. So let's try another example. We have HTML opening and closing, then we have these things called body in between the opening and closing tags of HTML. So when you type in text like this is a cool line of text between the body statement, you see how it shows up on the web browser because between body creates text that ends up on the web page, and it's sandwiched between HTML. Again, I love sandwiches. So pop quiz. Let's see what you have learned so far. Now it's time for another pop quiz. Let's test your knowledge of HTML. First, we went over text editors, then opening and closing tags, and then we went over body and head tags, and then how to make web pages and so much more. But let's in this section, we want to make sure we read the writing on the wall. In this section, we're going to talk about paragraphs, paragraphs. So we've already seen this line of code, the HTML opening and closing tag with our head, opening and closing tag, and we've gone over title and how it appears on the web page. But it's in between the body that we've noticed these P's. Here's a paragraph and here's another paragraph. But let's discuss further. In our notepad, we're going to go over this line of code and then we're going to go over and see how it appears on our web page. We have in between the body, sandwiched there is our P's for here's a paragraph and here's a paragraph. Here's another paragraph. That's what the P stands for, short for paragraph. And what appears within the body also appears visible on the web page. So that's a very important thing to remember, but not what appears between the head, but what appears between the body. So let's test your knowledge. Welcome. In this section, we're going to go over text formatting. Now, to your left, you're going to see a lot of different text formats. We have regular text, bold text, big text, italic text, small text, and strong text. But you see, we already went over P, which just stands for paragraph. But for regular text, there is no special tag symbol. But for bold text, we have the tag B. For big text, we have the tag BIG. For italic text, we have the tag I. For small text, we have the tag small. And for strong text, we have the tag strong. So now, let's test your knowledge. In this section, we're going to go over headings. Now, in our notepad, we're going to take a look here at what type of headings we have. For HTML headers, we have H1 through H6. Now you may wonder, which is larger, H6 or H1? 6 is a larger number, so we'll see. But what happens on our notepad affects what happens on our web page. So let's see what we have here. Here, an example would be H1 heading 1. So heading 1 is pretty big versus what we see as an H6, which is pretty small. So it goes in the descending order. The smaller the heading number, the larger the text is. So heading 1 versus heading 6 is quite different. And here's an illustration to show how it descends from H1 all the way down to heading 6. And here are the tags that coincide with them. We have the H1 tag for H1, H2 for heading 2, H3 for heading 3, and so on and so forth. As you see that it goes in a downward spiral. Now it's time for a pop quiz. In this section, we're going to be going over comments. Now, if we look at this here, we have this is a comment, and it's sandwiched between these interesting marks, which are slightly different than what we see as a traditional tag. Now, if you remember, our opening tag looks somewhat like this, and our closing tag also looks something like this. But our comment tag looks different. It kind of has the doc type similarities here. So, but what do you use a comment for? Well, let me illustrate the point. In our notepad, we have where we insert our code, and then we have our web page. And remember, what happens in our notepad also affects what happens in our web page. So you're typing in your line of code, and you want to put a header at the top of your web page. Call it your page, so that it appears there. But then you want to insert a comment, letting someone know that this code is for that reason. But it doesn't appear on the web page. Why is that? Well, comments do not show up on the browser. Comments actually show up more so on the back end as a way to help explain things or help document the HTML file for programmers in case they have to look over the lines of code so it makes more sense to them. Now, let's take a pop quiz. In this section, we're going to talk about attributes. Now, what is an attribute? An attribute modifies an element or a tag and provides additional information. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's illustrate that point. Here's an example. Align is an attribute. You can align your text to left, right, or center, similar to using Microsoft Word. You do p-align and then right. Then the text is aligned to the right. And as it appears on the web page, your text will be aligned to the right of the web page. Because of the align equals, and then you put in the direction you want to be placed on the web page. So let's look at another example. We have p-align, and then we want the text to be aligned to the left. So we insert the word left next to align equals. Then the text appears on the left. So now let's make a quick note because we're going to use this tag in our next section. Horizontal line, which is HR. Now an example that we want to use for this is horizontal width. We want to determine the difference between percentage width and pixel width. So we have horizontal width being 50% versus horizontal width being 50 pixels. Now what is the difference? We'll soon find out. Now horizontal width at 50% is greater than horizontal width at 50 pixels. Now why is that? Because percentage is total percentage of the page versus 50 pixels is the number of pixels on the page. Now if there's 300 pixels across in width and it's only 50 pixels, it will only take up 50 pixels worth of that total 300 pixels in width, if that makes sense. So now let's take a pop quiz. In this section, we're going to talk about HTML colors. Now, HTML colors come in various different forms, but we're going to be talking about the hexadecimal, how they're expressed using hexadecimal values, ranging from 0 to 9 and A through F. Now, colors come in combinations of RGB, so red, green, and blue. Hashtags come before you type in those 3 to 6 hex characters, such as the 0 through 9 and A through F. And you got hashtag FF, then 4 zeros equals red, or hashtag 4 zeros and FF equals blue, as well as hashtag all F's equal white, and so on. Now in our next example, we're going to be going over writing out a line of code as well as seeing how it expresses out on the background on our web page. Now we want to create a background color of blue and red text of font. So we have our body BG color, which means background color, and then we have our hashtag and then the hex characters. As well as we have the font color, then we have the hashtags and the hex colors for the red text. And if you see how it's displayed here at the bottom, that all was sandwiched together. All right? Now, let's prepare for this pop quiz. You ready? In this section, we're going to go over HTML tables. Now, let's construct ourselves an HTML table. Wait, this is not an HTML table. This is just a regular table. Now, HTML tables work differently. Let's go over some keynotes. There's 3 major tags we must know. First, we have the table tag, which is table, and then table row, which is TR tag, and then table column, which is TD, which also contains all the table data. Now here's an example code. We have our opening and closing table tag, which then sandwiches in there TR, which is table rows. Since we have one opening and closing tag of TR, that's one row. But we have 2 TDs, which is table column, which means we have 2 columns. So it's sandwiched in there because I love sandwiches, but if we look, the blue arrow indicates that we have 2 columns and the red arrow indicates we have 1 row. If you see how easy that was, let's take the pop quiz. Welcome to part 2. So now we're going to go over other key elements, a part of the tables section. We have a table header, which is defined as TH, and that is pretty much the header above the information, like first name, last name, and you have the names below. The first and last name is the header. And then we have our borders. Now borders, what creates the border around the table, which makes it defined and easy to separate all the information, which is the tag name is border. And then we have our col span, which is our column being able to spread out across 2 or more columns. You see we have 3 columns at the top and then we have 2 at the bottom, but we want to stretch one of those columns out so it still looks proportional. So now we're going to see this line out, see this in a line of code. We have our table border equals 1. Now 1 just indicates the thinness or the thickness of the border. Then we have our 3 columns, red, blue, and orange, and then we have our 1 row of TR of sandwiching all that information in. So let's write out this code to see what it looks like when you stretch out 1 column over 2 or more spaces. So we have our 3 columns here of red, blue, and orange, but then we have another row, but it only has 2 columns. So we have to stretch that span over with the col span of 2 in that line of code, if you see here. All right, now you ready? Pop quiz. In this section, we're going to go over HTML links. So imagine you go to a website and like, this is a really great blog. I want this compass and these pair of binoculars. And you're like, oh, click on the binoculars. And then you click on that binocular and it takes you to another page where it says, hey, buy now, buy now. Now that is a link. That's what we're going to be discussing in this section. So keynote. Links are found in nearly all web pages, and all web pages are constructed by HTML. Now the link tag is A, and the link destination tag is href. Now you put those together, you got href, then you put in the website, like udemy.com, and then after you put the site. Now the site is how it shows up on the website. So you see the words, the site, and it's clickable. You can click on it, and it takes you to that destination link of www.udemy.com as an example. Also, you want to put target equals underscore blank. This specifies where you want how you want the document to open up. If you want to open up in a new table or a new window. So you type out the same code, but then you just add target equals underscore blank. Then you put this site, so when you click on it, it then opens up in a new window. Ready? Pop quiz. In this section, we're going to go over HTML lists. Now there's 2 types of lists we're going to talk about in this one. ordered list and unordered list. Now we have ordered list, which is the tag OL, which comes in numerical order, and our unordered list, which is UL, which comes in bullet points. So we're going to construct out our ordered list and unordered list by looking at our notepad and our web pages. Now also a tag for list is LI, so that's very important as well when we're constructing out our lines of code. So we look at our HTML sandwich, we have our body, and within that body we have our list. For ordered list we have our ordered list sandwich, and then sandwich between there we have our list categories 1, 2, and 3, and it's contained within the opening and closing tags of LI. Same thing, but for unordered list, instead of OL you just put UL and then you sandwich in between the body as well, and you get it in decimals. Does that make sense? Time for the pop quiz. In this section, we're going to talk about HTML forms. So imagine you go to a swimming pool and you jump right in there like, yeah, I can't wait to go swimming. But then you realize you can't swim. But before you jumped in the pool, they said, could you fill out this waiver, which is another word for form. Now, this is not exactly like that scenario, but we're going to be talking about forms. So HTML forms are used to collect information from the user. HTML form tag is called form, and it's sandwiched between the body tag. So we have the form tag, which is sandwiched between the body tag, and the body tag, which is sandwiched between the HTML tag. Another key term that we must learn is the input tag. The input tag is used to collect users' input through text fields, such as like text, radio, URL, password, username, submit, and so on. And then you see the input type tag is sandwiched between the form tag. So we have the body tag sandwiches the form tag tag sandwiches the input tag. And it creates this delicious sandwich. I love sandwiches. So now let's see how it looks when we have our notepad, create some lines of code which then reflect on our web page. We have radio, checkbox, and submit. Now, we input our type radio with the name, the gender, the value, male or female. So it's going to show up on the web page as male or female. So with radio, that means you can only choose one of the options, not both. So you're either male or a female. Nowadays, I guess we're dealing with the gender changes, so it could be more than just a male or female. But for this example, it's male or female. And then we got input type for checkboxes. You go input type, checkbox. And you have the name, the value, and we're doing soccer or football. Now with checkbox, that means you have the option of choosing one or more options. Rather than with radio, you can only choose one option. So you can say I want to choose both soccer and football because I love soccer and football. And then we have the submit button. Now this line of code is a lot simpler, but it's just input type equals submit, value is submit. Now the value is what gives the name to the item that you see on the web page, which is going to show up as submit. Same for the value showing up soccer, football, or male and female. Are you ready for the pop quiz? Let's do it. In this section, we're going to talk about HTML images. So imagine you're sitting in your office and you're like, man, my walls are bare. I need some really cool stuff in here. So I need some pictures. So you're like, I'm going to go to the store, find some picture frames, and I'm going to put them on the wall. Well, here we go. Here, and here. I want to put these picture frames up. That's not exactly how it works in HTML, but you kind of get the point. So let's say you have a sandwich blog. You're like, I want a picture of a sandwich. So blot out magically appears. Woo, it just appears right there. I love sandwiches. So how do we do that for HTML? Well, here's how we go. So we have our notepad here and we have our web page. So we're going to illustrate our point through our code. So when we create this line of code, we have img src equals sandwich.jpg and then alt. As we see here, img is a tag for image, src is source where we're sourcing this file from, and then sandwich.jpg is the file name. So like I just previously said, we have image, which img, which is the tag for the image, and then we have src, which sources the location of the image, which is that tag for that. Then we have this beautiful, delicious sandwich. Now we have alt here, which is the alternate text to describe the image just in case the browser is unable to show the image. Alright, now let's further explain what we have here. We have height and width and percentage versus pixels. Now we have height of 100%, whereas width of 50% is different than height of 50% pixels and width 50 pixels, because percentage is a percentage of the page and pixel takes up the number of pixels based on the overall number of pixels allocated on the web page. So an example is we're going to look at our clocks here. Now we have a clock here versus percentage and pixels. Now we have a clock that's 100% height and 50% width. It will take up 100% of the web page's height and will accumulate only 50% of the web page's width. Now we have a pixel version of the clock, which is 50 pixels by 50 pixels. So it's only going to take up 50 pixels in height. If the overall height of the thing is 300 pixels and overall width is 400 pixels, for example, it'll only take up 50 pixels of the overall space. Now let's look at another line of code here. We have HTML body. Now the image source is sandwiched between the body. So if we look at here, we got image source in height pixels and height percentage. But you see how they still are sandwiched within the body. Are you ready? Let's take a pop quiz. Awesome job. Let's test your knowledge. So far we've learned paragraphs, text formatting, headings, comments, elements, attributes. We've learned about images, links, lists, tables, forms, and so much more. Let's see how much you remember. Let's test it.